Hey everybody, I got a video here for you today. Now, when looking back on Egyptian history, sometimes you have to travel outside the borders of current day Egypt to find it. And I'm going to take you into a site in the northern Sudan that was very important to the Egyptians. And this site is called Jebel Barkal, and that is the name of this mountain here. And this is just a little ways from the Nile. And maybe back in the day the Nile flowed really close to this place, but this is Jebel Barkal, and probably it's most famous for these pyramids here. And this is what they look like, and there's a lot of ancient remains in this area that I've come across, and I might do a later video on that. But these pyramids here were built in the Meroitic period, and this is what they look like. And that was about 300 BC by Nubian kings. They were influenced greatly when the Greeks took over Egypt. They came this far south, and the Nubian kings built these pyramids here. They're a lot smaller than the Egyptian pyramids, obviously in a lot better shape because they are newer. And this is what they look like in the distance. And I find it very interesting here, these stones in the ground, these look like they are in rows, and these mounds here, this looks like an ancient cemetery, and that is pretty interesting. But going back to Google Earth here, I'm going to zoom out, but that is what this area is most known for. And once again, I have found ruins up and down the side of the Nile, and I might do a little further video on that. But I want to take you into a site here and do a little reading. But this was very important to the 18th dynasty of Egypt and further pharaohs down the line. But these are ruins of Egyptian temples at the base of Jebel Barkal. And here is another one right here. But why was this place important? Well, the Egyptians thought the source of the Nile as being a very sacred place. And obviously the Nile flows northward, so down in what is present-day Sudan, and down that way, Ethiopia, the Egyptians regarded the source of the Nile as a very sacred area, and the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty really thought this place was special, and they built a temple here, and I believe this was started around the time of Amenhotep III. And that is what the evidence shows. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the temple here in a second. But I just want to do a little reading on Jebel Barkal. And this website, I will leave the link below. But one of the most important things, and Amenhotep III is one that really put in most of the work at Luxor and completed the temples up there. And one festival was very important, and it was called the Apet Festival. And I'm just going to read here. It says, the Luxor Apet Festival is one of the greatest events of the Egyptian ritual calendar and lasted 2 to 3 weeks. Its central event was a grand procession of the bark of Amun of Karnak, together with the king and the queen from Karnak to Luxor and ultimately back again. These barks, and that is what is depicted right here, these little boats, these barks were either carried on the shoulders of priests via the sacred way connecting the temples, which was lined with Osiride statues, sphinxes, and rest stations, or they were carried to the Nile, placed aboard real barges, and towed by water in one or both directions. However, one interprets the significance of the event. This journey of the barks simulated a cosmic voyage of Amun of Karnak and his son the king to their mythical birthplace at the primeval mound. And that, of course, has been associated with Orion. It says, after their mystical reunion with the Amun of Luxor, both Amun of Karnak and the king were thought to have been renewed. And it says, a transformation which was immediately followed by a coronation in which the king received a crown affixed with ram's horns. And here you see a depiction of that, and they just have a little map here indicating the route of the barges on this festival, traveling between Luxor and Karnak. And here you see Amenhotep III receiving his crown of ram's horns from Amun. And Amun is just the Egyptians' word for their most significant god. And this is exactly what was happening at Jebel Barkal. It says Jebel Barkal is famous as a primary coronation site. These texts reveal that the coronations of the Kushite kings and their annual reenactments were the most important rituals performed at the site during the Napatan period. And it says a growing body of data, however, indicates that these ceremonies were not original to the Kushites. They seem to have replicated those performed at Jebel Barkal centuries before by Egyptian kings, at least since the reign of Thutmose III, if not Thutmose I. And it talks about remains left at Jebel Barkal, and it says, in his 5th year, Amenhotep III traveled to the limits of Kush to wage a military campaign. A description of this episode set up records that he celebrated a coronation at a mountain called Hua, which, like Jebel Barkal, seems to have been a point of safety on the river, where enemy captives were assembled. And it says, while there is no evidence that Hua was Jebel Barkal, its characteristics are pretty much similar. And they think that this is actually where this important ceremony of Amenhotep III took place, at Jebel Barkal, and I believe he is the one that completed this particular temple here. And I'm going to try to give you the best view possible of this temple. And I believe Amenhotep III is the Egyptian pharaoh that the writers of the Bible took a lot of their stories of Solomon from. And if you look at this temple here, I have tried to find an original temple that was completed by Amenhotep III to show this, but a lot of them have been destroyed or built over, so you don't know what an original temple looked like. But this temple here, built mainly and finished by Amenhotep III, and here is what some of these ruins look like. This looks a lot like diagrams of Solomon's temple, and that's, I believe, where we get that from. Amenhotep III, he was referred to as the dazzling disk of the sun. He was referred to as a god. He was definitely Sol-Amun. He was the sun god, and he built this temple down here. This is where we get Solomon's temple. That is what I believe. And here is a ram at kind of an alleyway in this temple. Some of these still remain. This is what it looks like from overhead. And this is where I believe the original design of Solomon's temple comes from, are these temples, and he built many of them. He was the greatest builder in all of Egypt. He was the richest man in the world. He governed during a time of peace and prosperity, just like Solomon. These stories are identical. And here you have this big stone right in the middle, and I believe this is what is called depicted in the Temple of Man here. And this is a diagram by Danny Wilten, and I will leave the link to this video below. And here you see the Holy of Holies marked, and you see the design that we get of Solomon's temple here. And going back to the site at Jebel Barkal, this is exactly what we get here, the Holy of Holies. This is an original Solomon's temple built by Amenhotep III, Sol-Amun's temple. It is out in the middle of northern Sudan. And if you can't see the similarities, you're not looking very hard. But we have no archaeological evidence of a Solomon's temple ever existing. This is evidence from Amenhotep III of a design very similar, with similar features in it, of Solomon's temple. This was built about 3,500 years ago. This was an important site down in old Nubia, what is now Sudan today. This was considered a place of creation by the ancient Egyptians. The farther down the Nile you went to the source. And here is where it is located. Hope you followed along. Hope you thought this was cool. Have a nice weekend.